Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome to my channel. And today I wanted to talk about another book from the Booker Prize longlist for this year, and that is Claire Messud's This Strange and Eventful History. I always get that title slightly wrong. And it's an interesting family epic, and I'll talk a little bit about it. I'll go into some spoilers, not too many, later, and I'll let you know when that comes up. Also, apologies, I've got a slight cold, so if it sounds like I'm sort of talking underwater, then that's that. But anyway, let's get talking a bit about this book. So this book at its core starts off with what seems like a more sort of standard story about a family moving, and it kind of expands to be sort of several other things. And we find out throughout the course of the book, and I don't think this is a spoiler because I think it's sort of spoken about in various other parts of the book, kind of including the blurb and a few other things. But this is modelled on Claire Messud's own family history. And so although it is a work of fiction, there are some elements where it's very heavily leaning on her own family story. And the book itself then really engages with this idea of particularly a movement of a family and the kind of migration that goes behind that, particularly at the beginning of the book, looking at moving from Algeria to France and the difficulties that the family has with being seen as authentically French. And the book picks up on this several times, that this idea of Algeria being a French colony, and being this place that has been invaded by France, in various other parts of sort of the way France talks about Algeria, sees it as this French territory, but then yet when Algerians move to France or try to, they are not seen as French enough. And this comes up quite regularly in the book. And it sort of brought to mind for me other books that do this from a sort of a UK lens. So people talking about particularly the Windrush generation who moved to the UK, were told that they were British, and then had a really rough experience a lot of the time, and were kind of treated as sort of second-class citizens and many other things. And I think the book is at its most successful when it really interrogates some of those parts. I think the book does that in a really beautiful, lyrical way. I think just the writing style of this book, I think, is really very pretty. It's these gorgeous, sumptuous sentences, quite often talking about these rich family histories. And we sort of see throughout the book as she goes, the ways that she starts to tell this history with this sort of cast of characters who sort of rotate in and out. And we get this idea that this family is much bigger, and is sort of made up of all these people whose stories we need to hear in some capacity, even if they appear for a couple of chapters and then sort of we don't see them again for a while. And in some ways that's, I think, the kind of core thing that she's going for with this book, this idea that you can't really tell the history of a family without diving into these little kind of corners and little niches of everybody's tales and how they all interconnect. And within those stories, we see people who want to be writers and feel that they can't do that because they've got more pressing things to do, like keeping the family together or raising money to do whatever else. We see these sorts of thwarted dreams and aspirations because everybody's mostly focused on surviving and getting through. And that kind of is a big part of where the book, I think, is going with quite a lot of this. It is a detailed history of what it looks like when you're never quite secure anywhere, and where, your home life in Algeria and your kind of status everywhere else is incredibly complicated by several different factors, and you're constantly sort of on the move. So the kids running past the window, and all of these sorts of things that really come together to make this book, and to kind of make this family history. And I think those are kind of where I really enjoyed the book and what I thought was sort of well done about it. I think I struggled overall, partly with the length of this book. It is one of the longer ones on this long list. And actually, I felt like a lot became quite repetitive by the end. I think I'm also, I will put this on me more than the book necessarily. I'm not great when you have multiple characters, and particularly tons and tons of characters recurring through. I get quite easily lost about who everybody is. And I got quite lost with this book, and everyone kind of merged into one big character for me for a while. And that's kind of a big part of what I think I struggled with for this book. Is I think it kind of, we were hearing a lot of perspectives and a lot of stories about characters but yet I didn't feel like we were really moving forward plot wise. And it doesn't always have to be. And I think that's kind of her point with this book. You know, the fact that it's modeled on a real life a set of real life stories is, I guess, the point that they don't always have neat endings and they don't always move forward in a plot convenient way. But I think for me, the reading experience was often that, you know, this is very pretty and this is really beautiful writing, but I'm just sort of hearing again about another family member and hearing this other thing. And I fell off a little bit. And I found it really difficult to really approach a lot of the book with a lot of enthusiasm, unfortunately, because I kind of felt there was just a lot of it. Granted, if you're really enjoying the ride, I can see how this would be a really beautiful epic where you're just caught up in the richness of these family members' lives and the language and all of these other things. But for me, I got a little bit disjointed from some of those parts. And I kind of want to go into talking about some of the spoilers, because in some ways those are parts that I found both intriguing and frustrating within this book. But yeah, so those, if you do need to drop off at this point, great, not a problem at all. But if not, I'm about to go into some spoilers, so let's talk a little bit about those. If you do need to drop off, thank you for stopping by, and let's go on to those. So one thing I want to talk about with the spoiler curtain very much in effect is Claire Messud's kind of own kind of insertion into this story. So as I mentioned, this is a work of fiction, but she mentions in the acknowledgements that this is based on her family's history. And so these are, to some degree, real people, even if elements of their lives have been fictionalized and updated and changed and things moved around to make it convenient and all of that kind of jazz. But there are sort of a couple of parts really where Claire Messud herself exists within this book. And to some degree, that's to be expected. You know, if you're writing a family history about your own family, at some point you are born within this, and that's kind of natural that you would appear. However, I think for me, as much as I really want to like that idea of her existing within the story, I think kind of like the issue I had with Restless Dolly Maunder by Kate Grenville, I almost felt that she was too close to the story to be able to step back and kind of almost interpret it or kind of write about it in a way that felt slightly more detached, like she was viewing this family and was able to kind of observe their rises and falls. To some degree, her insertion in the book and whatever made it both sort of quite an interesting element to it, because she's going to appear, but also I found slightly frustrating because it felt like she has a vested interest in being more interested in this story than we might be. And so that's the part that I think I found slightly complicated and difficult. And I've seen it work. Like Ruth Ozeki, I think, is a really great example of this, where I think Ruth Ozeki inserts herself into her work in this kind of, still as a sort of detached character. You know, we see a woman in her 50s who's a writer across the room doing something, and we know it's Ruth Ozeki, but that is kind of almost done with a bit of a smirk. There's a kind of, oh, look, there I am. And I think in this book, in this strange and eventful history, I don't think it necessarily added much. And although you know it's going to happen to some degree, it kind of, I don't know, it didn't always fully land for me. And so this is a book that I found an odd one to really assess, because overall, I mostly really enjoyed the reading experience. I think it's clearly well written. She has a real beauty with the way she frames some of these sentences, and there's something so glorious and loving and caring about the language in this book. Clearly, she's put a lot of work into that, and there's a lot of love that comes through in this book. However, I think I just found myself becoming a bit detached with the overall book. Because I kind of couldn't quite get into the family members' histories and who was who and whatever. And I will admit, a large part of that is on me. That's my own kind of difficulty or challenge as a reader, not necessarily Claire Messud's fault. But that was something for me that just didn't land as well as maybe it could have. And every time I've seen a review of somebody else talking about why they loved it, I can totally see that. That makes sense to me. I see how those things would really thread together and this would be a really beautiful family history. But for me, there's something where it feels too much like we're kind of indulging the reader, the author's love about her own family, and there isn't necessarily the ability to step back and recraft some of these parts as a story. I would have loved to have read this, for example, as a memoir. I think that would have maybe given her a little bit more liberty to explore what she does and doesn't know about their lives, how that intersects with sort of Algerian statehood and that versus colonialism and all these other things. But instead, I think I kind of just felt that the book occasionally is more in love with its subject matter than I was. And that felt a bit difficult for me as a reader. Anyway, I'll leave it there. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Obviously, please do avoid spoilers if you can when talking about this. I still do think I see why a lot of people have really enjoyed this. It's just not my thing personally. But yeah, I hope you're doing really well. Take care and speak to you all soon. Bye bye.